Okay, we have question number 54. This is about tax exemption and how do we interpret this using the rule of strict construction and burden of proof. Okay, here's the scenario. The legal principle, taxation is the rule and tax exemption is the exception. Establishes the framework for interpreting laws that grant tax relief. Now, based on this, when Alpha Corporation claims a statutory exemption ito ha. So, marami tayong sources na exemption. We have yung galing talaga sa Constitution, and second, we have statutory, yung galing sa ating special laws and other tax laws that are enacted or that were passed by the legislators. And at this time, we have statutory exemption that is 12%. And on its sales by asserting that the service is educational despite being for profit. Okay. Now, which of the following statements accurately reflects the legal position of the burden of proof? Okay, so how do we justify na yung exemption niya ay pwedeng, or how do we construe or interpret this 12% in applying the tax exemption as claimed by Alpha Corporation? Okay, una is the burden is on the government to prove that Alpha. Okay, una, when you claim tax exemption, this is not favorable for raising tax. So therefore, if you are going to claim for a tax exemption, be sure that you can show proof that you are qualified for that. Yon ang kailangan. So, ibig sabihin, yung burden of proof to provide those evidences ay nasa taxpayer. Dahil yon sa, at first place, yung tax exemption that is in favor of the taxpayer. Letter B, so hindi itong sa letter C. Letter B, the burden of proof rests solely on the BIR to show the legislative intent was not exempt to exempt Alpha. Again, this is not also true with regard to this showing the burden of proof. The burden of proof, again, is always on Alpha, the taxpayer. Letter C, the claim must be supported by clear, ambiguous, and convincing proof from Alpha. So, it has to be provided by Alpha that it falls under the exact provision of the exemption law, yon. And any reasonable doubt in the law's interpretation must be resolved against the claim. So, yon. So, kung may mga doubt, it must be resolved against the claim. So, in other words, hanapan talaga ng ni taxpayer si Alpha Corporation na siya ay qualified. So, doon siya titingin siya sa intent of the legislators, kung vague yung kung vague yung, wala na pala yon pagdating dito sa exemption. So, it should be clear enough and equivocal, yung walang any doubt or ambiguity that the exemption is granted to Alpha Corporation. So, therefore, this letter C is the correct answer. Itong letter D, tax exemptions are contracts between the taxpayer and the state. This is not a contract. Itong mga tax exemptions, not necessarily. Kasi ito statutory, so hindi siya contract. Sinabi na kasi dito. Pero may mga tax exemption na galing sa contract. Kung ganun yung mga tax exemption na yan, it would be revocable anytime by the government. Kung kung yung galing sa contract pala ay hindi po yung pwedeng ma-revoke. So, in this case kasi hindi ito galing sa contract, so yung burden of proof should be provided by the Alpha Corporation kasi it's a privilege given by the government. Pag tax exemption galing sa contract, it's a bilateral agreement. I mean to say, each of the party nagkaroon talaga sila ng consent. So they agreed to each other na magkaroon na ganyan, and there's no doubt as to whether it has to be granted or not kasi nga galing na yan sa contract mismo. So, yung letter D is not the choice that is relevant to our situation. So, again, in our situation, the exemption is granted by way of statute. Kaya tinatawag siya statutory exemption. So therefore, the burden has to be provided by the taxpayer or Alpha Corporation itself.